Are you ready? You think you could tell us what to do? You think you could tell us what to wear? You think that you're better? Well, you better get ready. Bow to the masters. Break it down!
Hi, welcome to the Straight Lions Talk Podcast, off-season edition. This is your Detroit Lions Information Center for everything happening Detroit Lions. Today we're going to be talking about the Detroit Lions, as usual, about the upcoming free agency period for the Detroit Lions. It starts next week, March 9th, and we want to give you guys a look at what we would like to see the Detroit Lions do and where we'd like to see the Detroit Lions stay away from in the free agent period. We're going to talk about that, a few of the other issues that have come up this week, some of the moves Quinn's made, and a whole variety of different things Detroit Lions. But we're mainly going to focus on the free agent period and some of the combine, just a little bit of possibly how it could affect the free agent period for the Detroit Lions and where we see this going next week for the Detroit Lions. If you guys want to follow us, you guys can follow us on Twitter at STR Lions Talk Podcast, Instagram, Vine, Spreaker, iTunes, Stitcher, all those areas you can find us at STR Lions Talk Podcast. We appreciate everyone listening to the show. We've had our best responses the last month. We've gotten about 180 views depending on the show every week. We really appreciate it, and it's only because of you guys. So keep doing what you're doing. Keep sending it out to all your friends, Lions fans, family, whoever it is you can think of, and whatever source of social media you use, send it out. We want to hear from everybody. We want to gather all the Lions fans around the country and make this the go-to center for Detroit Lions information. So if you listen to us on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever it is you listen to us, Spreaker, wherever, leave us a comment, leave us a rating, tell us how we're doing, good, bad, whatever you think, just leave it. If you guys have any questions, like I said, you can find us on Twitter at STR Lions Talk Podcast. It's the easiest place to find us, and the easiest place you'll get a response from us is on Twitter at STR Lions Talk Podcast. Now we have to do Quinn's Moves of the Week. And this week, Bob Quinn, GM of the Detroit Lions, announced during the scouting combine that the services of left tackle Riley Reiff would be retained for the 2016 season. We here at Straight Lions Talk like that move. We didn't really see the Detroit Lions cutting Riley Reiff, even though if they cut him, they would have saved $8 million, and it wouldn't have been any cap hit. You know, it was a possibility. I mean, if Quinn would have came in and scorched earth, the whole Detroit Lions coaching staff and everything like that, maybe possibly they would have started over and let Riley Reiff go, but the Detroit Lions would not be able to find a left tackle as good as Riley Reiff in free agency and or this draft, unless you're drafting very early in this draft, top 10, to have the skill set that Riley Reiff has. He's not a great tackle. He's not the worst tackle. He's in between all that. He's about 15 on the tackle list. He was the Lions' best tackle last year. He won the Lions Offensive Tackle Award, whatever that is. He won that this last season as the best offensive lineman for the Detroit Lions. Now, that's not saying a lot, and that's not to say he's the best in the league, but it could be worse. We could have a worse left tackle than Riley Reiff, and that would ultimately be the case if we let Riley Reiff go and tried to sign, Okun, Glenn, one of those guys in free agency. I think Glenn was just franchised today. I'm not sure. I have to check that. I should check that before the show. But the odds of us signing a $12 million, $14 million a year left tackle under this new regime, that's not going to happen. Let me explain something to you guys. The days of players coming to Detroit in free agency for a paycheck, for their big payday, their second contract, and the Detroit Lions having to overpay are done. Bob Quinn, O'Brien, his new his new front office personnel are not going to do that. They are going to have the Patriot way where you cut a guy a year early, then a year late. If a guy is going into a contract year, let's say like an Ezekiel Ansah, just as an example, and the Lions believe that he is going to cost too much money and then money doesn't match his age and the production he's going to produce throughout that contract, he will be gone. The days of the Detroit Lions overpaying for guys like Az Hakim, Dre Bly, Nate Burleson, that stuff is done. It's all done. We're not doing that anymore. I would be dumbfounded, shocked if the Detroit Lions went that route in building this new roster with Quinn as the GM of the Detroit Lions. Like I said before, I think Quinn is going to copy a lot of the model of the New England Patriots, but I don't think he's going to hold every value that the New England Patriots have to heart. I think he has his own ideas. I'm sure he disagreed in some way, shape, or form with Bill Belichick on some of the things he did, like possibly getting Brady an outside receiver or, some of the draft choices they made because, the Patriots didn't draft extremely well. But with all that said, the Detroit Lions are keeping Riley Reiff, and I'm happy about it. I think that's a good move. I think it's a position we don't have to try to fill or desperately draft in the draft this season, or we don't have to go out and spend a huge amount of money or spend a lot of money for a player less talented than Reiff, because $8 million is right about where Riley Reiff deserves to be paid. And potentially, if he plays well, they maybe talk about contract extension, and maybe it doesn't exceed the $10 million mark, which it would if we tried to go out and acquire a left tackle of that caliber from another team, again, looking to get paid. I think Quinn's going to have a plan in place on how to pay these players, and I think you're going to see it come to fruition this offseason, and right next week you're going to see it on some of the signings he makes. And a signing he made this week, it was announced today, is Tyron Walker's coming back to a one-year deal. It's worth about $1.3 million with incentives and everything. I think it turns out to be 2.6. And I think it's a great move for the Detroit Lions. Walker played extremely well. We posted some videos on Twitter at STR Lions Talk Podcast. You can find them on there. They were by Brandon Thorne, talking about Tyron Walker and the productivity he had last year with the Detroit Lions and some of the positive things he did before he was injured and the direction he was going as a defensive tackle, and the progress he showed was on the up until he was injured. So I think this is a good sign for the Detroit Lions, as I guess it would be the first big signing in the Bob Quinn era, and it's a good contract. This is the stuff you can expect from the Detroit Lions from now on. You're not going to see the high-dollar, big-name guy come in unless he's a difference maker. Maybe a guy like Alshon Jeffrey would have worked last year, possibly, for the Detroit Lions if Calvin Johnson was going to retire with what they were bringing back. Let's say that defense was the defense we had in 2014. If we had that defense in 2013 and Quinn was here, and we knew we had that whole group coming back in 14 and thinking of how it would turn out, they possibly would go get a Mario Williams. I think Quinn will go get the pieces we need when it's appropriate. Right now, signing high-dollar, big-name free agents is not appropriate for Bob Quinn going into this free agent period. And that's what we're talking about today, the free agent period for the Detroit Lions starting next week. We do not believe the Detroit Lions are going to be day one big-time spenders. I know they have $30-some-odd million to spend and possibly $45 million with the retirement of Calvin Johnson if he decides to retire. And, I don't see the Lions being day one spenders. I see them letting everyone spend their wad of money. Jacksonville possibly, they have some absurd number, $70 million of cap space. It's just unreal how much money they have to spend. Let those guys go out and sign the big name guys, get that out of the way, and then we'll take the people we have targeted at a discount price, but at a high talent level. And I believe that's where the Detroit Lions are going with free agency going forward in the Bob Quinn era. It's not going to be like it was. It's not going to be impact guy. Oh, look who we signed. Oh, Nate Burleson, Quinn, possibly guys like that, but I don't think it's going to be for the money. Just go look at the roadmap that was drawn out by the New England Patriots for all these years. You never hear about the New England Patriots signing big name guys, and I believe that is a formula Quinn is bringing over from New England to Detroit. That is going to be a staple of the Detroit Lions organization. They're going to build this team through the draft on depth. And I'd like the addition of O'Brien because I like the Jacksonville Jaguars roster. I really like it. I like the way they've drafted the last few years. They kind of had a semblance of drafting best player available. I don't know if that's going to be the Lions formula in the draft, but that is kind of how Jacksonville seemed to do it. You know, a lot of guys that had slipped, they seemed like Jacksonville picked Marquise Lee, Allen Robinson, guys like that slipped in the draft a little bit, and they gobbled them up. I really like the skill players for the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I hope that is the formula that's being brought over to the Detroit Lions. I really like that roster, and I think the Jaguars are on the verge of something good down there in Jacksonville. They're a team to watch out for. It's a team that won't get a lot of credit because people don't give Blake Bortles a lot of credit, but he's a very good quarterback, and they've done a good job down there putting that team together, and I think that's what Bob Quinn's going to do here. Don't expect a lot of huge signings. They're going to be signings for emphasis, and some of the areas of need we think the Detroit Lions have to address in free agency. It may not be the biggest area of need, but the biggest areas of needs they need to address in free agency and not the draft this year is O-line, secondary, potentially, maybe defensive line in certain circumstances like this Tyron Walker deal, areas like that. But offensive line, running back, wide receiver, secondary, we'd like to see those areas addressed for the Detroit Lions in free agency, not in the draft. And here's why. The draft is not deep in those areas. The draft is deep in defensive linemen and front seven personnel. There's a scatter of receivers here and there and some secondary players, but the value for those guys are on the higher end of the draft. About 20 picks into the draft, the talent pool diminishes substantially, and that same player at 21 can be found at pick 101. So the Detroit Lions don't need to really stress over trying to find a secondary player in the draft early, an offensive lineman early, a wide receiver early, or an offensive lineman early, because it's not there. They need to concentrate on those issues in free agency where the class is a little deeper and it's veteran help. In all of those areas, rookies coming in seem to struggle, with maybe the exception of interior offensive linemen to a point if the offensive line is sound, or wide receivers. Seems like wide receivers adapt better to the game today, maybe to the fact that defenses are not allowed to jam, and the way things have opened up on offense. It seems like rookie wide receivers come into the league and make an immediate impact. But the Detroit Lions are not in a position with this current roster to take a wide receiver early. That's someone they need to take later on in the draft. But I believe in this free agent pool, the Detroit Lions can acquire help at the wide receiver position. Guys like Mohamed Sanu, Marvin Jones, Ruben Randall, the guy from the Patriots, from LSU, Brandon LaFell. Guys like that are just as effective as some of the first-round talent in this draft. And some of the guys we like in the draft, we've mentioned Sharon Peake, a guy that tested very well at the Combine, and he's not going to be there in the 6th round like we thought. We issued a mock draft during the Combine that we were working on prior to the Combine, released it during the Combine, just to give you guys an idea of some of the players to look at. And we did a Combine show, and we mentioned all the players in that draft and some of the secondary players we'd like to see them take if those players were not available. And all of those players seem to overperform their draft position at the current time. Now, that draft position we gave them was only there based on what the current projections were for those players. Due to the Combine, Sean Davis, Sharon Peake, guys like that have moved up. DJ Reader, guys we thought we could get 5th, 6th round, looking like a guy like Sharon Peake, 3rd, 4th round guy. A guy like Sean Davis, possibly 3rd, 4th round guy. DJ Reader's probably moved into the 5th round. Guys like that have moved up substantially due to the positive grades they got at the Combine. Andrew Billings, we had in the 2nd round, was projected as a 2nd round talent. I would like to see him slip. He's potentially a guy that could slip back into the 2nd round because as other people are rising, people are going to be nicking Andrew Billings for some of his faults. But going into free agent period, like I said, these are some of the targets we can have during the draft, and I don't mind drafting some of the wide receivers and offensive linemen. A Christian Westerman out of Arizona State, I really like him, but I don't like him as much in the second round as I do in the third or fourth round. I'd like to see the Lions attack the defensive line in the draft. Maybe a little bit in free agency to get some veteran help and leadership on the defensive line. Maybe Nada comes back. There's a rumor, possibly. We don't know, but Walker is back, did sign today, so we know that's a staple. But like we said, we'd like to see the Detroit Lions attack like the wide receiver position. In free agency, I think we need veteran help at that position and draft a guy for developmental purposes, a Sharon Peak, someone like that doesn't have to come in and be the number 2 guy. We don't need to go out and draft a number 2 guy. I think that's a misconception that a lot of Lions fans have had during this offseason, that the biggest needs for the Lions, wide receiver and O-line. They are needs. I'm not knocking that they're needs, but there's other needs too. Running back is a need. And we need to address that position. I think we should address it in free agency with a veteran back and maybe go out and draft a back. Because I'm not going to go on this big Zach Zenner rant right now. I will later, not in this show, but another show. Zach Zenner does not deserve to be on this team, and Zach Zenner shouldn't be on this team. The people that like Zach Zenner, the same people that like Corey Fuller and tried to tell me Corey Fuller was good and he was going to be a huge option and a weapon for the Detroit Lions, and he's not a weapon for the Detroit Lions. Neither will Zach Zenner. He's a nice story, good kid probably. I wish him the best. I think he'll be a great running backs coach someday in college football, possibly high school head coach, something like that. That's where his talent may lie in the league, being a coach. He's not going to be a gamer. He's not going to be a player. And for the people out there that want that feel-good story, great. Let's have a feel-good story on a guy that can make a difference for the Detroit Lions. And I do not believe that's Zach Zenner. That's why I believe we need to attack this position of need for the Detroit Lions at the running back position in free agency or possibly the draft. In the draft, the only player I would go after at 16 is if Ezekiel Elliott fell to us at 16. You run to the podium to draft him because he is a transcendent player, a difference-maker player, a top 3 player in this draft. He, talent-wise, is number 3, number 2 in this draft in our book here at Straight Lions Talk. We believe he is maybe the second best player behind Jalen Ramsey, Laramie Tunsil, in that same category. This is a transcendent player. I believe he's better than Todd Gurley. So here's the question you have to ask yourself, Lions fans, and I know don't draft running back in the first round. So you're telling me if Todd Gurley was in this draft and you knew the production he had his first year, you would not take Todd Gurley at 16. Yes, you would, and that's what you get with Ezekiel Ansah. A great player, a dynamic player, breakaway speed, ran 4.4 at the combine, tested out the gym, just killed it at the combine. Now, he's a player that is transcendent, a player the Detroit Lions need, a difference maker on the offensive side of the ball. You'll say, hey, we have Theo Riddick. We have Amir Abdullah. We drafted him last year. Abdullah and Ezekiel Elliott are 2 different players. Ezekiel Elliott, 3-down back. Abdullah can line up in the slot. Abdullah can give you a lot of things. So can Riddick. How do you know Theo Riddick's going to be back next year, guys? Bob Quinn will not extend him this year. I'd be shocked if he does. He's a player I think he feels he can easily replace. I think he feels like he can go get a Stephen Ridley to replace the production that Theo Riddick gives us. I understand how good Theo Riddick is, and I like the story and the development of Theo Riddick and the position he was drafted. Great value. Good player. But you have to make sure that you do the things you can do in this draft. If things fall in your lap, take advantage of it. A guy like Ezekiel Elliott falls in our lap. Take advantage of it. That's great value at 16, and it gives Matt Stafford that running back he's always needed. And you'll say, oh, we need an offensive line to do that. Well, I believe the offensive line will be better this year. I think all those issues are going to be worked out this offseason. I don't think we're going to run such a complicated blocking scheme in this offseason as we did last year under Lombardi. And if that brings us to the offensive line, you want to talk about offensive line we should go get? We need veteran leadership on the offensive line. And for all you guys out there saying, yep, Dominic Raiola's gone. You know what? Dominic Raiola was a tool. Dominic Raiola was probably laughed at behind his back in the locker room. He was that guy that thinks he's a leader of the team and no one respects. I guarantee it. I can sense it by the way he speaks and the way people treat him and the way players... None of the players came out and said when he retired, oh, just lost a great leader. No one. I don't remember any. If maybe I didn't read the right articles. If I didn't, please send them to me. Where players came out like, oh man, there's the heart and soul of the offense for the Detroit Lions. He held it together for us. No, he yelled and screamed in the locker room. People rolled their eyes and didn't respect Dominic Raiola. He played forever. Unfortunately for us, he played way too long. And I thought having Travis Swanson would be a better get, and it's not. He needs to develop. Maybe he's a guy that needs a couple, 3 years to develop. Maybe this is the year he breaks out. Maybe Bob Quinn can get through to him the same way he did with Matt Stafford. So I believe we should address the offensive line in free agency also. Veteran leadership on the offensive line, veteran leadership at the wide receiver position, a guy that isn't going to make mistakes in the offense, a guy that understands how to run routes, how to get open in the NFL, can read defenses. That's what we need for Matthew Stafford. We have Golden Tate. We have T.J. Jones. I believe those guys are good weapons for Matthew Stafford. Eric Ebron needs to step up. We don't know what the status of Brandon Pettigrew is, but I'm sure that Quinn is going to take care of that in free agency. Names like Scott Chandler have been brought up for the Patriots. Brandon LaFell, like I said, was brought up this week. And those are all great names to bring in. I wouldn't mind a Scott Chandler. He does a lot of things well. He blocks well. He's a good receiver at times. He's a weapon in the red zone that maybe teams don't account for when you get down there. I don't have a problem with Bob Quinn bringing in a player like that because I think he's equal to Brandon Pettigrew. Maybe not as good a blocker, but ultimately, same level, same caliber player that won't cost as much as Brandon Pettigrew. I believe Quinn's going to have each position broke down for cost, and he will not exceed it. He'll have that budgeted out. He'll have tight end, $8 million a year. We're not going over it. Offensive line, $20 million. We're not going over it. So some of the hard cuts you're going to see in the future for guys like Larry Warford, a great video on our iTunes account, on our Twitter account with Larry Warford just crushing a couple dudes and some of the down blocks he makes. It's just phenomenal. I think it was put up by Brandon Thorne again. He does a great job. If you guys don't follow Brandon Thorne, please follow him. He is a great follow. Some of the things Inside the Pylon, if you guys don't follow them on iTunes, follow them and listen to their podcast. Ours first, then theirs. Inside the Pylon does a great job with Brandon Thorne talking to him about some of the body types you need for the NFL. Just a great info. Just look it up. But for the Detroit Lions and their offensive line issues, veteran leadership is the key. We need to get that solidified through veteran leadership. Our offensive line is young enough. I don't believe Riley Reif's a leader of the offensive line, and I think that's what's missing. And potentially maybe we go out and get a center that has leadership ability for the Detroit Lions in this free agent period. And I, again, want the Detroit Lions to in free agency go after these areas. Safety, wide receiver, offensive line, and running back in those areas. Now, maybe running back is probably the least of my worries. I believe we're set with the two we have, and if we have to acquire a guy later on in a later period of time, maybe when camp starts, if we don't end up drafting a guy. But I think we will end up drafting a running back. A guy like C.J. Proheis could be there in the 5th round with we have 3 5th-round picks. Potentially, if the Nick Fairley compensation pick comes in this week as a 3rd-round pick, a 5th-round pick, and the Sue comp pick as a 3rd, I think we get the first one on that. So, with all those extra picks coming in, we're going to have 12. You take a shot on C.J. Proheis or some of the other running backs in this draft, a Jonathan Williams, someone like that. But if you want to address it in free agency, I don't think we're going to go out and sign a Doug Martin. I don't think we're going to go out and sign an Arian Foster, Matt Forte. Those guys are probably not going to be options for the Detroit Lions, but there's other areas they could attack at the running back position in free agency. So veteran leadership at those positions are key, but I would say running back is the least of my worries. But what is a worry for me is safety position for the Detroit Lions. There's a rumor out there, the Detroit Lions, and someone we mentioned in our free agent show that we would like to see was our number one safety to bring to the Detroit Lions is a safety from Cincinnati, George Iloka, from the New England Patriots, from the Cincinnati Bengals, a multi-dimensional safety with a lot of tricks up his sleeve. He's what the league is now at the safety position, a guy that can come up, play the run, come play a tight end physical, and have the ability to cover wide receivers in the slot and on the outside. He's a difference-making safety that has good ball skills, but along with a hard-hitting attitude in the run game. He's good against the run. He's good against the pass. He is multi-dimensional in the ways you can use him. You can bring him up, use him in the box. Like I said, he's physical enough he can fend off tight ends. He can cover, a guy like Gronk, a guy like Jimmy Graham, some of the bigger, more athletic tight ends. Jordan Reed, guys like that, he is able to cover. He's long-armed, fast, just a great player out of Boise State. He would be a huge get for the Detroit Lions, and I believe here at Straight Lions Talk, or we here at Straight Lions Talk believe that that is the area of concern for the Detroit Lions. That's my number one area I want covered, the secondary veteran leadership we're going to need. Remember, Rasheem Mathis retired this year. I think he was a leader on that side of the ball. I believe Quinn is a leader on that side of the ball. But getting a guy like Aloka is just a good get. Young player, a lot of upside still in his career. I don't think he's going to cost a small fortune to bring in, but he will be a pricey free agent. I believe that's about the limit the Detroit Lions are going to spend in free agency. Guys like Mario Williams are not coming to Detroit. I would be dumbfounded, shocked if he comes there. So getting a guy like Aloka there is a key piece for the Detroit Lions, a veteran safety. We talked about Abdullah from Kansas City, a guy like that, bringing someone like that in. Now, I do want the Detroit Lions to draft a safety, but a guy like Sean Davis, who we mentioned in our mock draft we put out during the NFL Combine, you can find that at STR Lions Talk Podcast on Twitter. You can find it there. We mentioned Sean Davis as a fifth-round pick, I believe, to the Detroit Lions. I love the pick. I love the developmental purpose of having a Sean Davis come in. The Randy Edsall connection from from Maryland would be huge for the Detroit Lions. A guy that can come in immediately, Sean Davis that is, and play special teams for the Detroit Lions while he develops behind Quinn. He could possibly take over Quinn's position because he, like Aloka, can play a multitude of positions on the defensive side of the ball, so he could switch over to Quinn's position just as easily as he could switch over to George Aloka's position. That would be a huge, huge pick for the Detroit Lions, but he showed out very well at the Combine and showed his athleticism and some of the coverage skills he possesses for a man of his size and the ability he has to be able to play in the box against the run and to be able to play physical against tight ends and cover wide receivers in the slot and on the outside. That's Sean Davis. Very good player. The Detroit Lions interviewed him when he was at the Combine. He's a difference-making safety, and sitting behind guys like Quinn and Aloka are huge for guys like Sean Davis that need maybe just a little bit more technique and development. And Terrell Austin's done such a good job with our secondary, which that's how he cut his teeth in the NFL, as being a secondary coach for the Baltimore Ravens before he got the the defensive coordinator position for the Detroit Lions. That's a key area for the Detroit Lions is the developmental safety, and Sean Davis, University of Maryland, could be a key player for the Detroit Lions in the draft. But getting a guy like George Aloka in free agency would be huge. I would love that. That would be the start of a great signing period for the Detroit Lions if they could ink a guy like that. He would, like I said, it would open up a multitude of possibilities for the Detroit Lions defensively, having a guy like that. He, like I said, I mentioned it. He's so flexible and the things he can do on the defensive side of the ball. He'd be a huge get for the Lions. So remember that name. It was the guy we targeted earlier on, about a month ago in our free agent show, a guy we'd like to see the Detroit Lions, safety, George Aloka from the Cincinnati Bengals. We really like him. We think he's going to be a phenomenal get if the Lions can get him. It'd be a huge signing. It'd almost be as big as when Quinn came to us, and we've seen what he can do. Just go watch some of his game tape and some of his college tape. He's a great player. So, like I said, veteran leadership. It takes so long for safeties and cornerbacks in this league to get accustomed to the NFL speed and the concepts and some of the offenses that pro offenses throw at rookies. Even the best ones come in and struggle. Darius Slay struggled. Everyone. Tremaine Johnson struggled. Janoris Jenkins struggled. And, hey, let him sit. And we think that about at the cornerback position also. I think we need to address the cornerback position in this free agent period with a veteran guy. A guy like Rasheem Mathis, maybe a little bit younger, maybe not so close to the end. Maybe a guy from the New England Patriots, their system, their attitude. I think we're going to get a couple New England Patriots in here so they can install some of the New England Patriot ways, if you will. Bill Belichick was big about that when he first went to the New England Patriots, and when he was with Cleveland, he brought a lot of former Giants there. Bill Parcells was huge about bringing in his guys from his teams, guys he drafted when he was with all of his teams. When he was with the Patriots, he brought Giants guys. When he was with the Dallas Cowboys and the Jets, he brought Patriot guys, Jet guys to Dallas, on and on. So they bring that in so that attitude can be installed in the locker room, so Quinn does not have to try to do that also. He does it with the players, because ultimately it's the players' locker room. The coaches can't control it. You need leadership on the field. And that's why we want to address these areas on this podcast during the free agent period, because we believe, we'll go over it again, I'm sure you've heard it, wide receiver, offensive line, running back, and the secondary positions should be addressed in free agency, not in the draft early. I don't care if we go out and get some of these developmental guys early in the draft, later in the draft. Like I said, Sean Davis, DJ Reader, Christian Westerman out of Arizona State, offensive guard, great player, huge hands, physical, looks like an offensive lineman, probably going to be an all-pro, a potential guy that moved up in the draft because he tested so well. A lot of the guys we picked, they were targeted in our mock draft at that position when we mocked it. But the performance they had, because we thought they were good players, it moved them up. And we'll see where it all pans out here in the next month or so. And some of these guys are going to move a lot up. Some are going to move down. And maybe the Lions can get a steal the way the Jacksonville Jaguars had under Ken O'Brien. And potentially with Bob Quinn, they can maybe steal a couple of these guys in the draft. That'd be huge. But in free agency, like I said, we want to see the Lions attack these areas specifically in free agency for veteran leadership. Wide receiver position, I don't think it's as dire straits as people make it out to be. Yes, Eric Ebron needs to step up. TJ Jones needs to play better. I believe he will. He's a good slot receiver. But I think you're going to see the Lions attack that in free agency. Getting a guy like Mohamed Sanu, Marvin Jones, a Brandon LaFell, possibly a Ruben Randall. I'm not the biggest Ruben Randall fan in the whole world. But, hey, these are the areas we want to see the Detroit Lions attack in free agency. That's our show today. We really appreciate everybody joining us. Like I said, if you guys want to follow us on Twitter and leave us some questions on Twitter. We really didn't have we had a lot of responses this week. We didn't have any questions that were worthy of being on the show. So please, leave those questions on Twitter at STR Lions Talk Podcast. We will bring them up on the show. Dad and Dez did last week. We debated that. We've gotten in some good debates on Twitter with some of our Lions fans. We have smart fans. We're trying to make this a smarter collective group of Lions fans around the country. So tune in to Straight Lions Talk. Every week we cover these issues that we feel will affect the Detroit Lions and some of the positive and negatives. And we give it to you straight. We give you the straightforward information the way we see it. Not sugar-coated, nothing. The way we see it. Just like the Zach Zenner thing. It's the most negative thing we've probably had on here besides the Calvin Johnson retirement question, and the Calvin Johnson's not a Hall of Famer question. So, if you guys want to follow us, like I said, follow us on Twitter at STR Lions Talk Podcast. Follow us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, Vine, Instagram. You can follow us on all those different formats, all those different social media sites. Facebook's coming. The page was screwed up the first time we did it. I don't know what happened. It's just a mess. I'm not the biggest fan of Facebook, but we'll get it figured out. We'll get another one up for you guys so you can have more ways to contact us, and we can give you guys more information regarding the Detroit Lions. So, like I said, please keep sending it out to all your friends and family. We really appreciate everybody out there. And I'd like to give a special heads up and a special good luck to Ben Hutchings out of Portage Central. He's going to a regional combine in Minnesota, and I wish you the best of luck, and I hope all your dreams come true because you have a lot of talent, and he played at Grand Valley State, everybody. So he's a hometown kid. Let's give him a lot of support, and just hope he has a good showing and gets a good look at the regional combine. So with all that said, we thank everybody out there for joining us as we always do. Please follow us on Twitter, questions, like us give us feedback on iTunes. Give us a rating on Stitcher, iTunes, Spreaker. Tell us what you think, good, bad, or whatever it is. We'll see you next week.